Don't move. The words cut through the night air, sharp and controlled, but just a fraction too fast, like they had been rehearsed. Marcus Reed's hands stayed exactly where they were, resting lightly on the steering wheel, fingers relaxed, not gripping, not trembling, just there, as if the moment had already happened before. The red and blue lights pulsed against the rearview mirror, washing the inside of his car in slow, alternating color, turning the dashboard into something unreal, something distant. He didn't turn around right away. He didn't need to. He had already seen the cruiser pull up behind him nearly a minute earlier, had already noticed how it lingered just a little too long before the lights came on. The road stretched empty in both directions, a narrow two-lane strip of asphalt cutting through a quiet industrial edge of town. No traffic, no witnesses, no noise except the low hum of his engine and the distant buzz of a flickering street lamp overhead. Exactly the kind of place where things happened without interruption. Slowly, Marcus exhaled, his breath steady, controlled, as if syncing with something deeper than the moment itself. In the side mirror, the officer stepped out of the cruiser, his silhouette framed by the flashing lights, posture rigid, confident, deliberate. Officer Daniel Hayes. Even from this distance, there was something in the way he moved, too certain, too composed, like a man walking into a scene he already believed he owned. Marcus's eyes lowered for just a second, not in fear, not in submission, but in quiet observation, catching the smallest detail as the officer approached. The angle of his shoulders, the placement of his hand near his belt, the quick glance he cast down the empty road, as if confirming something unspoken. Then it happened. Subtle, almost invisible. A slight shift of movement near the rear door as Hayes passed alongside the car, his hand dipping just out of sight for half a second too long. Most people wouldn't have noticed. Most people wouldn't have been looking for it. But Marcus saw it. He always saw it. The air inside the car felt different now, heavier, like the silence itself had weight. The officer's shadow stretched across the window before a firm knock landed against the glass. License and registration. The voice was calm, flat, practiced, but underneath it, something else lingered, something tighter, something expectant. Marcus turned his head, slowly, meeting the officer's gaze through the glass. No anger, no confusion, just a quiet, steady look that held for a beat longer than most people would dare. Then, without a word, he reached for his wallet, movement smooth, unhurried, precise. The kind of calm that didn't come from innocence, but from certainty. Outside, the lights kept flashing. Inside, Marcus already knew. This wasn't a stop. It was a setup, and the man standing at his window had just made the first move. Marcus handed over his license without a word, the small plastic card resting flat in his open palm for a second longer than necessary before the officer took it. And in that brief pause, something unspoken passed between them. Not hostility, not fear, but recognition, the kind that never needed to be named out loud. Officer Hayes barely glanced at the name before shifting his attention back to Marcus. His expression unchanged, controlled, almost bored, but his fingers tightened slightly around the edge of the card, as if anchoring himself to a script he had already decided to follow. The radio on his shoulder crackled softly, a distant voice speaking in codes and fragments. But Hayes ignored it, stepping back half a pace and scanning the interior of the car with a slow, deliberate sweep of his eyes. The beam of his flashlight cut across the dashboard, the center console, the passenger seat, lingering just a second too long beneath the front seat before moving on again, as if marking something only he could see. Marcus followed the movement with his eyes, not turning his head, just watching, measuring, storing every detail with quiet precision. His heartbeat remained steady, almost detached from the tension surrounding him, like it belonged to a different moment entirely. Hayes circled toward the back of the car, his boots crunching lightly against the gravel shoulder. Each step measured, each movement controlled, but there was a faint shift now, a subtle edge in his posture, like anticipation tightening beneath the surface. He stopped near the rear door, glancing once more down the empty road, confirming the silence, confirming the isolation, then leaned slightly forward, his hand brushing near the lower edge of the door frame, right where the shadow from the flashing lights made it difficult to see clearly. Again, it was quick, almost invisible, but Marcus saw it, the same small motion, the same careful placement, and this time there was no doubt. The pattern was complete. Hayes straightened and returned to the driver's side window, his expression now carrying a hint of something sharper, something closer to certainty. "Step out of the vehicle," he said, his tone firmer, leaving no room for hesitation, but Marcus did not react immediately. Instead, he blinked once, slow and deliberate, as if finishing a thought, then nodded slightly and opened the door, stepping out into the wash of red and blue light. The night air felt cooler now, sharper against his skin, carrying the faint scent of asphalt and distant machinery, and for a brief moment, everything seemed to pause, the lights, the sound, even the space between them. Marcus stood upright, hands visible, posture relaxed but grounded, his gaze meeting Hayes again, steady, unwavering. There was no confusion in his eyes, no urgency, no attempt to explain or defend. Just a quiet awareness that settled into the space like something inevitable. Hayes gestured toward the front of the car, positioning Marcus beside the hood, the metal still warm beneath the pulsing lights, and as he moved, Marcus turned his head slightly, just enough to glance down the empty road behind them, his eyes narrowing for the briefest second, not in worry, but in timing. Then he looked back at Hayes, calm as ever, and in a voice so even it almost disappeared into the hum of the night, he spoke. "You are going to want to be very sure about what you do next, officer." Hayes did not respond right away, but something flickered across his face, quick and uncertain, before it vanished just as fast, replaced by the same rigid confidence as before. He stepped back, already reaching for the next part of his plan, unaware that the moment he believed he controlled had already begun to shift. Hayes let out a quiet breath through his nose, the kind that sounded controlled but carried a trace of irritation beneath it, as if Marcus's calm had disrupted something he expected to go differently, and without another word, he stepped away from the hood and moved back toward the driver's side door, his flashlight already raised again, the beams slicing through the dim interior with renewed purpose. "I am going to take a quick look inside," he said, his tone shifting into something procedural, something official, but it felt rehearsed, like a line delivered too many times to count. Marcus did not respond. He simply stood where he had been placed, hands relaxed at his sides, eyes following every movement with quiet precision, his posture unchanged, grounded, almost patient. Hayes opened the door and leaned in slightly, the light moving slower now, more deliberate, tracing the edges of the seats, the seams of the upholstery, the floor mats, each pass more intentional than the last, until it settled beneath the front seat, exactly where his earlier movements had lingered. There was a pause, a longer one this time, the kind that stretched just enough to signal something was about to happen. Hayes reached down, his hand disappearing into the shadow for a brief second before re-emerging with a small plastic bag held carefully between his fingers, lifted into the light as if it had always been there waiting to be found. He straightened, turning slowly back toward Marcus, the flashing lights catching the edge of the bag and reflecting off its surface in sharp bursts of color. "You want to explain this?" he asked, his voice lower now, more controlled, but beneath it there was something else, something closer to satisfaction. Marcus looked at the bag, then back at Hayes, his expression unchanged, not surprised, not defensive, just steady. For a moment, he said nothing at all. The silence stretched between them again, thicker this time, charged with something that neither man acknowledged out loud. Hayes took a step closer, closing the distance, the authority in his stance more pronounced now, reinforced by what he believed was evidence in his hand. "Possession is a serious charge," he continued, each word measured, deliberate, as if building a case in real time. "Especially out here, alone, late at night." Still, Marcus did not react the way Hayes expected. No protest, no confusion, no raised voice. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, his eyes narrowing just enough to sharpen his focus. And for the first time since the stop began, there was the faintest shift in his expression, not fear, not anger, but something closer to confirmation. As if a question had just been answered. Hayes noticed it, even if he did not fully understand it, and it unsettled him for a fraction of a second, a brief flicker that passed across his face before he forced it away, tightening his grip on the bag, grounding himself again in the authority of the moment. He reached for his radio with his free hand, pressing the button, his voice steady as he began to call it in, listing location, situation, details, each word reinforcing the version of events he intended to make real. Marcus listened without interruption, his gaze shifting once more down the empty road, then back to Hayes, his breathing still even, his posture still calm. But beneath that calm, something had changed. The stillness was no longer passive. It was deliberate, calculated, waiting. Hayes finished speaking into the radio and clipped it back into place, taking another step forward, positioning himself just slightly to the side, as if preparing for what came next, confident now, certain that everything was unfolding exactly as he had planned. But as the lights continued to flash and the silence settled once more over the empty stretch of road, he did not notice the subtle shift in Marcus's stance, the almost imperceptible adjustment of his weight, or the way his eyes moved again, not toward the bag, not toward the car, but past Hayes, into the darkness beyond, as if tracking something that had not yet arrived, but was already close enough to matter. The radio call faded into static, leaving the night heavier than before, as if the silence itself had tightened around them, and for a moment, neither man moved. Hayes shifted his stance, squaring his shoulders, the small bag still held firmly in his hand like proof that everything was now under his control, his authority no longer implied but asserted. "Turn around," he said, his voice steady, practiced, carrying the weight of routine, but there was an edge beneath it now, something sharper, something that needed this moment to go exactly as planned. Marcus did not turn right away. Instead, he looked at Hayes for one more second, holding the gaze just long enough to register something deeper than compliance, something that made the air between them feel different, like the balance had already begun to tilt. Then, slowly, he turned, placing his hands calmly behind his back without being asked again, his movements precise, deliberate, almost measured against an internal clock. Hayes stepped forward, closing the distance, his presence now dominating the narrow space between the car and the road, and for the first time, his breathing was not perfectly even, not perfectly controlled, just slightly heavier, as if the certainty he had been carrying was beginning to press back against him. He reached toward Marcus's wrists, pausing for a fraction of a second, not because he needed to, but because something in Marcus's stillness felt wrong, too composed, too aware. "You should have stayed quiet," Hayes muttered under his breath, almost more to himself than to Marcus, as if trying to reassert the logic of what he was doing. Marcus's voice came in response, low, calm, steady, cutting clean through the moment without raising in volume. "I am quiet," he said. "You are the one making noise." Hayes froze for just a fraction of a second, the words landing harder than they should have, not because of what they said, but because of how they were said, without fear, without urgency, without any sign that Marcus believed he was in danger at all. The flashing lights reflected across Marcus's face, red, then blue, then red again, and in that rhythm, Hayes noticed something he had not seen before, not clearly, not fully. It was not defiance. It was not arrogance. It was certainty, the kind that did not come from hope, but from knowledge. Hayes pushed the thought aside, tightening his focus, his hands moving again, but the moment had already shifted, even if he refused to acknowledge it. In the distance, far beyond the curve of the road, a faint glow appeared, barely noticeable at first, like headlights cresting a hill too far away to matter. Marcus saw it immediately. His eyes flicked toward it for less than a second before returning forward, his posture unchanged, his breathing still even, but something beneath that calm settled deeper, more grounded, like a countdown reaching its final seconds. Hayes did not notice. Not yet. He was too focused on the scene directly in front of him, too invested in the version of events he had already committed to, too certain that the outcome was already decided. He adjusted his grip slightly, preparing to move forward, to finalize the moment, to turn assumption into record, but as the distant lights grew just a little brighter, just a little closer, the silence around them shifted again, no longer empty, no longer isolated, but filled with something approaching, something inevitable, something that would not wait. The distant headlights grew larger. No longer a faint glow but a defined presence cutting through the dark stretch of road, their beams steady, controlled, approaching with purpose rather than coincidence, and for the first time, Hayes hesitated. It was small, almost imperceptible, A slight pause in his movement as his eyes flicked past Marcus's shoulder toward the road behind him. "Stay still," he said quickly, the words coming sharper now, less controlled, as if the situation needed to be contained before it changed. Marcus did not move. He did not need to. His hands remained calmly behind his back, his posture unchanged, but his breathing slowed even further, settling into something deeper, something final, like the last second before a storm breaks. The sound of the approaching vehicle became clearer now, tires rolling steadily over asphalt, not speeding, not rushing, just arriving, deliberate and unhurried. Hayes shifted again, stepping slightly to the side, positioning himself between Marcus and the road, as if instinctively trying to block whatever was coming from fully entering the moment. His grip tightened, his shoulders squared, and for a brief second, the confidence he had carried began to crack at the edges. "Backup is already on the way," he added, almost defensively, though no one had questioned him, as if saying it out loud could reinforce control that was already slipping. Marcus tilted his head just slightly, not enough to challenge, not enough to provoke, just enough to acknowledge something Hayes could not yet see. "That is good," he said quietly. "You are going to need them." The words landed differently this time. Not like a warning, not like defiance, like a statement of fact. Hayes's jaw tightened, and for a moment, his eyes locked onto Marcus's profile, searching for something, anything that would make sense of the calm in front of him. But there was nothing there to read, nothing to interpret, just stillness, steady and unshaken. The headlights behind them slowed, then stopped several yards away, their beams cutting across the scene, overlapping with the flashing red and blue lights in a strange, shifting pattern that made the entire space feel unreal. The engine did not shut off. It idled quietly, a low, steady hum that filled the silence between breaths. Hayes turned fully now, his body angling toward the vehicle, his stance no longer centered, no longer fully controlled. A door opened, then another. The sound was soft, but in the empty night, it carried. Marcus's eyes moved again, just briefly, following the motion, then returned forward, his expression unchanged, but the air around him felt different now, no longer waiting, no longer building, but shifting into something inevitable. Hayes took a step back without realizing it, his focus splitting between Marcus and the figures emerging from the vehicle behind him, his mind trying to catch up to a situation that was no longer following the path he had set. "What is this?" he muttered, more to himself than anyone else, the certainty in his voice replaced by something tighter, something uncertain. Marcus did not answer. He did not need to. The moment was already answering for him. The approaching figures moved with purpose, their silhouettes clear now in the overlapping lights, their pace steady, their direction unmistakable. And as they drew closer, Hayes's grip loosened just slightly, the first visible sign that the control he thought he had was no longer his to hold. The figures stepped fully into the light, their outlines sharpening as they moved past the edge of the headlights, not rushing, not shouting, just walking with a quiet authority that did not need to announce itself. And with each step, the balance of the scene shifted further away from Hayes. Their jackets caught the flashing red and blue in brief reflections, dark fabric, clean lines, nothing excessive, nothing uncertain, and yet there was something unmistakable in the way they carried themselves, something that made the air feel tighter, more defined. Hayes straightened instinctively, his posture snapping back into place, but it was no longer the same confidence, no longer the same control. It was reactive now, defensive, as if he were trying to meet a presence he had not expected to face. "Evening," one of them said, his voice calm, measured, cutting clean through the layered noise of engines and lights without raising in volume. And that single word landed heavier than anything that had been said before. Hayes blinked once, his eyes shifting quickly between the approaching men and Marcus, as if searching for a connection he had missed, a detail that would explain why this moment felt wrong. "This is an active stop," Hayes replied, his tone firm but edged now, his words coming just a fraction too fast, like they needed to establish ground before it slipped away. The man who had spoken did not stop walking until he was just a few feet away, close enough for the light to fully reveal his expression, calm, unreadable, but focused, and when he stopped, he did not look at Hayes first. He looked at Marcus, just for a second, a brief, almost silent acknowledgement, but it was enough. Hayes saw it. He felt it. And something inside him tightened instantly. Marcus did not move. He did not turn. But the smallest shift passed through him, not visible in his posture, not in his hands, but in the way he stood, grounded, complete, as if the waiting was over. The second man stepped forward slightly, positioning himself just behind the first, his gaze steady on Hayes, not aggressive, not confrontational, just present, like a line that had been drawn without needing to be spoken. "We are going to take it from here," the first man continued, his tone unchanged, but the words carried weight now, quiet authority layered beneath calm delivery. Hayes opened his mouth to respond, then paused, his eyes narrowing, his focus sharpening as he tried to reassert control, to push back against something he did not fully understand. "I already have probable cause," he said, lifting the small bag slightly as if to anchor himself to it, to make it real again, to bring the moment back under his terms. The man's eyes flicked to the bag, then back to Hayes, and for the first time, there was the faintest shift in his expression, not surprise, not concern, but recognition, like seeing something expected unfold exactly on cue. The silence that followed was different now, no longer empty, no longer waiting, but filled with a quiet certainty that settled over the scene like something final. Marcus finally turned his head slightly, just enough to look past Hayes, his gaze steady, calm, and in that single motion, the distance between what Hayes believed and what was real became impossible to ignore. The flashing lights continued, the engines idled, but the moment itself had changed, no longer controlled by the one who started it, but by the one who had been waiting all along. Hayes held his ground, but the certainty in his stance no longer matched the moment unfolding around him, his eyes moving quickly now, calculating, searching, trying to regain control over something that had already slipped beyond him. And for the first time since the stop began, there was hesitation in the way he breathed, in the way his shoulders rose just slightly higher than before. "I said I have probable cause," he repeated, his voice firmer this time, louder, as if volume alone could anchor the reality he was losing. The man in front of him did not react to the tone. He did not step back. He did not challenge. He simply reached into his jacket with a slow, deliberate motion and held up a badge, the metal catching the flashing lights for a brief second before settling into view. Clear, undeniable, final. "Federal Bureau of Investigation," he said calmly, each word measured, precise, leaving no space for misinterpretation. Hayes stared at the badge, his eyes narrowing at first, then widening just slightly as recognition began to surface, not all at once, but in pieces, like something he did not want to fully accept. His grip on the small bag loosened without him realizing it, his fingers no longer anchored by certainty, but by doubt. The second man stepped forward, his presence now closer, more defined, his gaze steady on Hayes as he spoke, his tone just as calm, just as controlled. "You are going to place that evidence down and step away from the vehicle." Hayes did not move. Not immediately. His eyes shifted from the badge to Marcus, then back again, and in that moment, the connection he had missed earlier came into focus all at once, not as a possibility, but as a realization that hit too late to change anything. Marcus turned fully now, his hands lowering slowly from behind his back, not in resistance, not in urgency, but in quiet completion, like the end of something that had already been decided long before this road, long before this night. The flashing lights reflected across his face again, but this time, they did not distort him, they revealed him, calm, composed, certain. "Director Reed," the first man said, his voice shifting just slightly, not in authority, but in respect, and the title hung in the air heavier than anything that had come before it. Hayes froze, completely. The name, the title, the presence, it all aligned at once, collapsing whatever control he believed he had into something fragile, something already broken. "Director," Hayes repeated under his breath, the word catching slightly, not from confusion, but from the weight of what it meant, of what it changed, of what it exposed. Marcus met his gaze, steady, unblinking, not angry, not satisfied, just present, and in that silence, the truth settled in fully, leaving no room for denial, no space to retreat. Hayes looked down at the bag in his hand, then back at Marcus, And for the first time, there was no authority in his posture, no control in his stance, just the realization of a line crossed, of a moment that could not be undone. Slowly, almost mechanically, his hand lowered, the small bag hovering uncertainly in the space between them before he let it drop onto the hood of the car. The soft sound it made against the metal barely audible, but final. The agents did not move quickly. They did not need to. The moment had already shifted completely, and Hayes felt it, standing there under the flashing lights, no longer the one in control, but the one being seen, fully, clearly, for the first time. The small plastic bag rested on the hood, unmoving, insignificant now, stripped of the power it had carried just moments before, and Hayes's hand hovered in the air for a second longer, as if unsure what to do without it, as if the absence of control had left him without direction. The agents did not rush him. They did not raise their voices. One of them stepped forward just enough to close the distance, his presence steady, measured, and without a single abrupt movement. He reached out and calmly guided Hayes's wrist down to his side, not forcefully, not aggressively, just firmly enough to make the point clear. "That will not be necessary anymore," he said, his tone even, controlled, leaving no room for interpretation. Hayes did not resist. He did not argue. His shoulders dropped slightly, the tension draining in a way that felt sudden, almost disorienting, like a structure collapsing quietly from within. His eyes flicked once more to Marcus, then quickly away, unable to hold the gaze that had remained so steady throughout the entire encounter. Marcus stood where he was, no longer positioned against the hood, no longer framed as a subject of suspicion, but simply present, his posture relaxed, his hands now at his sides, the calm around him no longer defensive but complete. One of the agents moved toward the front of the car, carefully observing the placement of the bag, his eyes tracing the details with quiet precision, while the other remained near Hayes, maintaining a steady presence that required no escalation. "We have been tracking irregularities for some time," the first agent said, his voice low, controlled, directed more toward the moment than any one person, and Hayes's head lowered slightly at the words, not in submission, but in realization. The silence that followed was no longer tense. It was heavy, reflective, filled with the weight of something undeniable settling into place. Marcus took a slow step forward, not toward Hayes, not toward the agents, but simply forward, recentering himself in the space that had shifted around him. The flashing lights continued to pulse, but they felt distant now, like background noise to something far more significant. Hayes swallowed, his throat tightening slightly, his breath uneven for the first time, and when he finally spoke, his voice was quieter, stripped of the authority it had carried before. "I did not know," he said, the words coming carefully, as if choosing them could undo what had already been done. Marcus looked at him, not sharply, not with anger, but with a steady, measured gaze that held for a moment before he responded. "That was never the point," he said calmly. There was no accusation in his tone, no raised voice, just clarity, simple and direct. Hayes nodded faintly, the motion small, almost automatic, as if acknowledging something he could not fully articulate. The agents exchanged a brief glance, subtle, practiced, then one of them stepped slightly to the side, creating space without breaking the structure of the moment. Marcus adjusted his jacket with a small, precise movement, his expression unchanged, his presence grounded, and as he looked once more down the quiet stretch of road, the night seemed to settle around him differently now, no longer uncertain, no longer waiting, but resolved. Hayes remained where he was, standing under the flashing lights, no longer directing the scene, no longer controlling its outcome, but fully inside it, aware in a way that could not be reversed. And in that stillness, no words were needed to define what had happened, because everything that mattered had already been seen. The engines idled low, steady, like a heartbeat returning to normal after a storm, and the flashing lights that once dominated the scene now felt distant, almost unnecessary, their colors fading into the edges of the moment rather than defining it. Marcus Reed stood quietly beside his car, no longer framed by accusation or tension, just present, composed, his gaze resting somewhere beyond the immediate, as if the night itself had opened back up around him. One of the agents moved toward the cruiser and reached inside, switching off the overhead lights with a simple motion. And just like that, the red and blue vanished, leaving only the soft glow of headlights and the faint hum of engines in their place. The silence that followed was different now, not heavy, not waiting, but settled, complete. Hayes remained where he was, his posture no longer rigid, no longer structured by authority, but softened, uncertain, as if he were standing in a space that no longer recognized him the same way. His eyes lifted once more, meeting Marcus's for a brief second, and in that glance there was no challenge left, no assertion, just the quiet weight of understanding, of consequence, of a moment that had drawn a clear line he could not step back across. Marcus held the gaze for a second, then let it pass, not dismissing, not condemning, simply allowing it to end. He reached into his pocket and retrieved his keys, the small metallic sound sharp in the quiet air, grounding, ordinary, almost symbolic in its simplicity. Without urgency, he walked around the front of the car, his steps measured, steady, each movement free of tension, free of the pressure that had filled the space just minutes before. The agent nearest him gave a slight nod, subtle, respectful, and stepped aside without a word, clearing the path without needing to be asked. Marcus opened the driver's door and paused for just a moment, his hand resting lightly against the frame, his eyes drifting once more across the empty road, the quiet stretch of asphalt that had held so much weight not long ago, now returned to stillness. Behind him, Hayes exhaled slowly, a breath that seemed to carry more than just air, his shoulders lowering as if something inside him had finally settled, though not comfortably, not completely, but enough to be felt. No one spoke. There was nothing left to say. Marcus stepped into the car and closed the door gently, the sound soft but final, and, for a brief second, everything held still again, the kind of stillness that did not demand attention but lingered quietly in its own presence. The engine started with a low, steady turn, and the headlights stretched forward along the road, cutting through the darkness with quiet certainty. Marcus did not look back. He eased the car forward, the tires rolling smoothly onto the empty lane, and as he drove away, the distance between him and the scene behind him widened without resistance, without interruption, like something that had already resolved itself completely. In the fading glow of the departing headlights, Hayes stood alone under the dim streetlight, the night settling back into place around him, no longer defined by power, no longer shaped by control, but by something quieter, something harder to ignore. And in that silence, with nothing left to hold on to, the truth remained, not spoken, not explained, but present, clear, and unmovable.